Is he rolling? All right, great. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. Thank you so much for coming to the second London Symposium here at the Seckford. I'm very excited to have you back again. Those who were there at the first one know me as Ria Lina. Those of you who haven't, I'm still Ria Lina. My job at the beginning, I'm gonna do a little bit of warm up for you. Okay, we're gonna get to know each other a little bit more because in the second half of the evening we are going to have a bit more of a discussion, a bit more of a Q&A. That is part of what the London Symposium wants to bring back into pub life is the conversation that we seem to have lost, especially in London where we don't do eye contact, but we will smell a stranger's armpit on the tube. So, and also because I want to loosen you up. Those of you, again, who have been here before know that there's going to be an opportunity for loads of conversation and everything else. Last time, our topic was, now that Brexit is done, where do we go from here? Today, the topic is toxic tribes and civil disagreements, which should be incredibly exciting. We have a panel and a chair who I will introduce to you in a moment, but it's only fair that we first get to meet some of you, our audience. You're panicking, madam. You're panicking. Are you okay?
Yeah, no, I hate that.
I know. So many people do. Don't worry. You sat 4 rows back on the hopes that I wouldn't be able to see you, and we have not dimmed the lights. So I understood. Then I will defer to those that do wish to talk to me. But I think it will just help the overall evening if we, dare I say, lube ourselves up with a little bit of friendly conversation. So I won't ask anything that you don't want to answer. No, I will ask things, but if you don't want to answer, don't answer it. I think it's fair to say. I'm going to start with our 2 lovely gentlemen that are sitting in the front row. Hello. First of all, thank you for sitting in the front row. And if anyone standing at the back, other than the 3 who have reserved chairs on the dais, wish to sit down, like perhaps the gentleman who just arrived, hey, come on in. Come on in, grab a seat. We'd love to have you. We have 5 to choose from, even 6. If you could block this lady from me, she'd love you for it. Feel free. Feel free. Welcome. That is a fabulous scarf.
Thank you, guys.
I'm not sure which political party you support off the back of the colors of that scarf.
It's
I'm guessing maybe
non-denominational.
or it's bi-denominational. Speaking of toxic tribes, you've brought us brilliantly into that with the red and the blue. But no, we were speaking to our 2 friends. Hello, lovely to have you. We were speaking to our 2. I'm just going to talk a little bit to the audience, see who is in, and then we will start our panel. And then in the second half, as I said, we're going to have a Q&A. So, hello. I already know you as Sandy Starr, of course. But Sandy Starr, do you want to tell the rest of the room a little bit more about what you do and where you work?
I work at a charity called the Progress Educational Trust, which is a fertility and genomics charity.
Okay, so it's an educational trust for fertility and genomics. Yeah. So we're trying to populate the earth. No?
Those who wish to populate the earth should have the means to do so.
Okay, understood.
Those who don't are under no compulsion.
Yeah, we're not forcing it on them. Okay, so we're not impregnating the fertile, we're helping those that aren't with it.
Exactly.
Understood. Good. Hashtag consent. Welcome to 2020. Okay, wonderful stuff. And what about yourself? What's your name?
My name is Kirill.
Hello, Carol. Oh, Carol has some wonderful further names, don't you?
Yes, it was pulled from Facebook. So
it's pulled from Facebook, so it's not real anyway.
Nobody uses my middle name.
Except Facebook, apparently. Except the Russians. Well, that's typical of the Russians online, isn't it? To know more about you than you do of yourself, isn't it? So, Carol, you work for, are you allowed to say?
Yeah.
Okay. He works for Threat Spike Labs, which is thank you very much. Oh.
Fantastic.
Otherwise, I have to repeat everything you say for the record. There you go. Carol.
I work for Threat Spike Labs. It's a cybersecurity company based in London. So we effectively help people protect their networks.
You help people protect their networks from the Russians, although
and
you yourself
everyone else
are Russian.
Yes. No, you're enemy.
But not necessarily our friend. I'm not sure where to put you, in which box to put you, but wonderful stuff. Over here, hello, we've got just sort of like 3 young gentlemen. It's like the I don't know, it looks like a boy band from Westminster. It's just a beautiful, just kind of, I can see you doing your first music video up against the scaffolding of Big Ben. But can we meet you as well? Hello, what's your name?
I'm Chris Carter.
Oh, sorry, I have to pass this back and forth. I forget, because it's just for the recording. I forget that it isn't amplified.
So I'm Chris Carter. I work in PR, crisis management and public affairs for Media House International.
For Media, say it again.
Media House International.
I took the mic way too soon. Okay, crisis management. I think that's fascinating to everyone, especially since we're going to be discussing civil disagreement. So you do that. You help people in incredibly stressed situations with crisis management?
So yes, so companies or individuals who might find themselves receiving negative media briefings, we assist and help kind of clarify the narrative for them.
Oh, wow, that is PR speak, isn't it? We clarified the narrative, i.e. rewrite the narrative. Wonderful stuff. So are you helping anyone in particular with maybe the coronavirus crisis at the moment? No. Other than myself, by the way, if I cough, you don't need to leave, I'm fine. 2 people are racist. Great, good to know. No. Everyone else went, don't be silly. I'm sure you self-quarantined in the truck on the way over. Okay. Yeah, that's where we're going with tonight. We're loosening it up. Like I said, we're lubing ourselves up, so just get used to laughing, because that's my job. All right, sorry, coronavirus, any helping anyone with that?
No comment.
That's a yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to us. And what about yourself? It's Jack Harris, am I right? Hello, Jack Harris.
I work at a charity at the moment, helping out young kids, making sure they speak up and stuff.
I love how you said that by barely speaking up yourself. You were so nervous to do so, but well done. So you're working at a charity. Who else is working at a charity? Just so I know who not. Okay, there we go. She's protected. Look at that. She just threw her halo up straight away. I'm a good person. That's fine. What, can I ask what your charity is? Are you all right with that? What's your name?
I'm Jane Sanderman. I'm a Chief Operating Officer for the Passage, which is a street homeless charity in Westminster.
Oh, fabulous as well. Fabulous. Okay. And who I definitely, can I ask to introduce you to the room as well?
If you want.
I want to, only because on the guest list, as you all know, I checked in the guest list, and your title on guest list was conservative influencer. So I don't know if that means that you influence people conservatively, or you are yourself conservative and influence the rest of the world to think that way. I don't know if you can be a conservative influencer. Tell me a little bit more about that. What's your name, first of all?
My name's Emily, and first of all, I'm a student, which is pretty boring. But then aside from that, I kind of have a second job, which is just being on Twitter 24/7, you know, showing people that Brexiteers and Conservatives aren't just old men. No offence to the old men in here.
So you're like a British version of, what was her name, Tomi Loren? Is that her name? No, what's her name? Was it? No, okay, not that bad. Not that bad?
I don't really care.
Where do you study?
At King's College, London.
And what do you study?
I'm doing politics, religion and society. So
I almost didn't have to ask, did I, really? No. That's wonderful. And you're also here with a fellow student, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes, and do you study the same thing? Exactly the same thing. Fair enough. All right. Well, then this is a perfect environment for you. Let's talk to 1 or 2 more people, and then we're going to start the night. I'm just coming into the audience now. We're getting deeper and deeper. Hello. Is there anyone who would like to be introduced to the room who's come before, and therefore it makes a difference to what they say later on? Because as we all know, when we do a Q&A and when we comment on things, who you are can often mean a lot to what you say. Of course, no one's going to volunteer for that, are they? Okay. Well, I'm gonna. Oh, look at you all avoiding eye contact. Yes, comedians famously are like ostriches. If you don't look at them, they don't know you're there. I'm gonna pick on someone. I'm gonna pick on you. Is that okay? Yes. Thank you so much. But it was the eye contact and the lovely open smile. So, what is your name?
I'm Matt Kilcoyne. I am the Deputy Director at the Adam Smith Institute.
Ooh, you also made it sound like the different name to what it is. Say the institution again for me.
Adam Smith. It's the guy on the 20 quid note.
Adam Smith. Oh, the guy on the 20 quid note. I'm a comedian. I don't see those very often.
Now.
Oh, the new plastic one.
Yeah, we know the old one.
Oh, the old one. So
Yeah.
we're getting rid of Adam Smith. We're getting rid of Adam Smith, but you are deputy director of the old 20-pound note. Okay, the old guy. Tell me very quickly a little bit more about him.
He is the founder, the father of modern economics, of capitalism especially.
So do we like him for that?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Do you have an alternative explanation you'd like to throw into the room to describe Adam Smith? He's dead, right?
Yeah.
Right, okay, so he's not going to complain on Twitter later. Emily might, but he's Scottish. There we go. That's an alternative. The head of, really? So the father of modern economics is Scottish?
Yes.
So he purports not to spend money, or?
He was quite famous for sort of what we espouse sort of free market ideals of him, but actually a lot of left wingers use his theories as well to suggest that the government should be involved in various things. He basically founded economics as a discipline, and therefore he's very contentious about who owns his legacy. I think that would be what you were going to say. But like I take the view that he's the founder of sort of free people, free markets, and free society.
A lot of good brains up there north of the border. No wonder we don't want to give them independence. Okay, wonderful. Can we give a round of applause to everybody who's just introduced themselves to the room? Thank you so much. Now, before I bring on our chair and our two speakers for the first half of this night for the panel, if we could please also give a quick round of applause to David Lonsdale and the Seckford here for hosting us, because they've done it very, very generously. So if we could give them a round of applause, just say thank you right up at the top for providing us with such a wonderful space in which to have these discussions and to further this conversation. Without further ado, though, I would like to. I don't need that anymore, do I? Can we pass that back? We're learning. Like I said, this is our second symposium, so we're learning. But I believe that I'm mic'd up. Can you still hear me? Am I still? Yeah. Okay. I know. It's somewhere down there. Okay. That's all that's down there, really. Let's be honest. I love how you just don't know how I'm pitching the evening. All right, just don't know. But we've laughed a couple of times, and that was the aim, to just loosen us up a little bit. All right, without further ado, please could you welcome to the stage our chair of tonight's event, Rachel Cunliffe, the comment editor for CityAM. We also have Ash Sarkar, who is the senior editor of Novara Media, with us. And Nikos Sotirakopoulos, the senior lecturer at York St. John University and academic advisor to the Ayn Rand Centre UK.
Or we're doing this thing.
Did I nail it?
All right.
I nailed it, right?
Excellent, excellent.
All right. I'll hand you over now to Rachel.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming. This is Making Symposia Great Again, I think, is the aim of tonight. This is, by the way, probably the only panel discussion where when we get to the question sessions after the break and you want to say something and you start off with, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement, we're going to go, yes, say. We're trying to bring back the kind of interactive audience engagement there. And if you don't have anything to say, you'll get picked on. So have some ideas. Civility, toxic politics, tribalism, are we getting more tribal? Are we getting more vicious as a society when we discuss politics? Or has it always been this way, and are we getting more sensitive? And what did the last election teach us about any of that? Starting off, to talk about civility, libertarian, communist and Spurs fan, Ash, tell us about civility and politics. Take it away.
Deeply tribal about all those things, especially the Spurs bit.
Yeah.
I wanted to sort of think about this framing a bit and really unpick, what do we mean when we talk about civility in politics? And it means you've got to do some work unpicking the assumptions in both things. What is civility and what is politics? Because it's one of those topics which journalists and politicos love to hold forth on, because essentially we're talking about how nice are people to us. And it lets us off the hook for not only our own participation in uncivil or toxic behaviours, but lets us off the hook in terms of the systems that we participate in and the social consequences of those very systems. We don't have to think very much about power. It gives us the luxury of thinking about politics as essentially a high-stakes debating society, which is sort of dictated by courtly norms and decorum, and it means that anyone who is seen to be a threat to those particular norms or those forms of decorum is themselves uncivil, and they've sort of isolated themselves out of the terrain of legitimate debate. So the usual civility script is that we have these lofty values, they're very nice, they're of debate, they're of decorum, but they've been corroded in our age of social media abetted populism. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say nothing has changed, because obviously social media has changed things. Obviously it amplifies things. It allows us all to interact with each other when it comes to political debates, social debates, cultural debates in a way that we hadn't been able to before. Sometimes those things are good. Sometimes those things mean that you end up spending your day the way I did today, trying to get a porn platform to get rid of a video that's been edited of you. Not very nice. That's something which I don't think necessarily happened to my mum or my grandmother's day. However, this idea of politics as the business of pulverizing your opponent into submission, that's not something which has been invented in the post-2015 landscape. I'm sorry, but my favourite centrist, John McTernan, which you were very upset about when I mentioned in the green room, you were like, I thought I was your favourite centrist.
I'm your second favourite centrist. Right?
Second favourite. You're close. You're going to knock John McTernan off the top spot any second now.
See how we do later tonight.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you get me a drink, then he's dead to me. But John McTernan, who was Tony Blair's director of political operations, he's really fond, if you go back to some of the stuff he was writing when David Cameron was Prime Minister, he was really fond of sort of talking up the Cosa Nostra tactics of the Labour whipping operation. So he once talked approvingly of backbencher management being something that was done by this poor, newly elected backbencher who would later serve as a cabinet minister in both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's ministries, being accosted by a whip in the House, pushed up against a wall, grabbed by the bollocks, which then got twisted, and then this whip got in his face and said, "Son, you've done nothing to upset me yet. But imagine what I'd do if you managed to." And then later on in the same article, John McTernan remembers being in the House of Commons bar when the Iraq vote went through. And he says that someone turned to him and said to him, "Do you hear that noise, John? It's the sound of limbs being broken." So I don't think that the MP who turned to him and said that was necessarily thinking about the lives of Iraqi civilians there, but it gives us a sense of how we think about violence, intimidation and hostility being tools of political management long before either Brexit or Corbyn, the far left, arrived on the scene. And so I think that rather than saying, well, we've all got our hands dirty, and it's certainly true, and then leaving it at that, it might then give us a clue to thinking about how we might want to change political culture and how we might want to start breaking down some of the barriers between those who are allowed to use such tactics and it's seen as all right because it occurs purely within the halls of Westminster, and those who are seen as disruptive forces for, being hostile or hard-edged or moralising when trying to change the way that those systems function. One of the things that I particularly want to think about is the way in which crises of civility aren't really crises of civility, they're crises of gatekeeping and the forms of conflicts which emerge when you're trying to change the way in which political culture and media culture works, and regardless of whether you think those changes are for the better or for the worse. And I want to leave you with one thing about thinking about the ways in which the business of polite policy making can seep out and change people's lives. And this was long before the age of social media. Do you remember the asylum seeker moral panic in the early 2000s? I see by a show of hands who can remember the asylum seeker moral panic. Yeah? Yeah? Got a few people who can remember the asylum seeker moral panic. I was at primary school, or maybe I just started secondary school then. And I remember watching the news, and you had headlines generating news lines in broadcast media, and it was sort of driven by the Sun in a big way of these ideas of bogus asylum seekers coming to this country to claim their benefits and da-da-da-da-da. And it was something that was being driven by the papers, and then it dominated the broadcast news cycle. And then I remember David Blunkett doing this big intervention about how New Labour was going to crack down on asylum seekers. This is, of course, the kind of rhetoric which then led to Phil Woolas during his re-election campaign in Rochdale saying that the Lib Dems were the party of failed asylum seekers. It then later emerged that all of this was sort of stage managed and confected outrage, and it gave room for New Labour to look tougher on immigration when that was something that they'd historically suffered on. And so you think, well, all right, well, it's largely polite and it's something which is, taking place within the arena of politics proper. Why should we start bringing this into a conversation about hostility and incivility? Well, I remember being at school during that time, and no one knew what the word asylum seeker meant, except it then became an insult and something which was particularly used against people whose parents came from, other countries. And none of the kids knew what they were talking about. All they knew is that asylum seeker meant dirty, it meant wrong, it meant unpopular, and it became a sort of stain and a weight in children's lives. And so rather than thinking about nastiness or incivility or toxicity as something merely about interpersonal interactions, which I know is how we like to think about politics. We've all watched The West Wing. We love a cast of compelling characters. Is actually thinking about the ways in which the dry, laborious, boring business of policy creates social circumstances which shape our lives and affects the way in which we interact with one another. I think I'm done.
Round of applause for Alex. Before we come back to maybe the 100 different strands that you brought in excellently in those 5 minutes, Nikos, individualist, humanist, and a Greek Liverpool fan.
Yes.
What would you like to teach us about tribalism?
That tribalism is accepted in football, but only there.
Okay.
Right. So I think there's a big paradox in this discussion. So politics are indeed toxic. And you'd expect that what causes this toxicity is this polarization. But actually, polarization would mean that we have two opposite polars. You'd expect that, for example, we have a left and a right, and they are both very clear, let's say, materialization of different, fundamentally different ideas. But this is not what we see. We usually, in most Western countries, even in the United States, I would say with Trump, we see two sides that more or less, unfortunately for us, I would say, more or less agree on the fundamentals. For example, they agree that the state needs to have a presence in the economy. Now, they might disagree whether income tax should be 26% or 25%, but the margin of disagreement is quite small. Or they agree that we, the people, are a mess, and we need the nanny state to protect us from ourselves. Now, they might again disagree whether we should be protected from, let's say, how much sugar there should be in our fizzy drinks, or what kind of posters we should not be able to see, but they agree that we need this intervention. So if you compare this, for example, with the 60s, where in many Western countries you had huge communist parties, like 30%, people who actually wanted a completely different system, and this system brought around via revolution. You'd expect that, okay, this is a polarized kind of environment. I would expect there to see, quote, toxic politics. But we see this toxicity, I think, more today than back then. So the question is why? Why, although I claim the stakes are not that high in politics today, we see this toxicity? And my explanation is that in order to answer this question, we need to understand what is a political division today. And what do we mean today by right and left? And I believe that right and left today is not so much a division of ideas. It's more a division of two different teams, or two different groups, or two different tribes. So that's how we can explain these two sides changing radically their view on specific topics. So, for example, throughout Europe, we see the left changing its view on the issue of the European Union. Or we see the right, sadly, giving up, for example, in many places, the idea of freedom of movement, or free trade, or of free markets. And yet, although we see them changing their view on this issue, they have a base, and they're still kind of in conflict with each other. And the only explanation I have for this is that this conflict happens because left and right is not anymore about ideas. It's about groups that are opposed to each other. And there's a name for this, and the name for this, in my opinion, is tribalism. Tribalism basically means you see yourself, you see others, and you see the world around you through the prism of the group. And tribalism is problematic for various reasons, but one of the reasons, it's problematic because it's an assault on ideas. Tribalism basically means I don't take ideas seriously, because it's not who you are and what you say, it's which group you're part of. And let me give you a simple example. Obama goes and meets Raul Castro. All conservatives are like, this is treason. You give moral sanction to a dictator. Donald Trump goes and meets Kim Jong-un. This is 4D chess. This is diplomatic brilliance. This is like the new Clausewitz. Again, the only way you can understand this is you see these people as part of this tribe. It says, our guy cannot be wrong. Therefore, although he did something similar with what the previous guy did, which was bad, but now because it's our guy, it's good. Now the question is, where does civility fit into all this? And I think there's a wrong kind of civility. It's also a civility which, like tribalism, does not take ideas seriously. And it's the civility that says, well, can all be friends. Like, I'm gonna meet you in the middle, right? You're right in some issues, I'm right in some issues. Well, we can meet in the middle. Because this basically means ideas don't matter. So I think the right kind of civility is that we can disagree like there's no tomorrow. We can go to the intellectual barricades, and maybe the real ones, if the time comes for that. But we do this by making sure that what we are fighting here is first and foremost the ideas. So that's why I don't like these videos on YouTube, like Ben Shapiro destroys this guy. Because when it becomes this kind of personal thing, or when this discussion becomes name-calling, like you're a racist, now, it's not a nice way to have a discussion, but also what is hidden is that you don't actually expose why these people have wrong ideas. And actually, we were discussing in the green room, like, for example, you have someone who is, I don't know, an alt-right person. If you can tell him 5 times you're a Nazi, you're not actually going to persuade many people in his audience. Whereas if you ask him a question that any person with a mind is going to say, oh yes, obviously, this person is like, that makes no sense. Then you're not civil in terms of I respect your ideas, but you're civil in terms of I'm going to debate this so that I expose why this idea is wrong. So because ideas matter, and because ideas change history, and because we have to fight the battle of ideas like there's no tomorrow, because this is what the future depends on, that's why we have to be civil. Thank you.
You're making lots of notes there, you're doing your homework.
Yeah, I was. I thought you said some interesting things, so I'm making some notes. Some big nerd energy over here.
Do you want to respond, or do you want me to ask you a question and then you can get top marks?
Miss, I want whatever you want, miss.
Good answer. Let's go back to the last election, because when we talk about civility and toxicity in politics, we're basically talking about the last 3.5 years in this country, and particularly the run-up to December. And because you are a lady of the left, can we call you that?
No one's ever called me a lady before.
There we go. First time for everything. In terms of what went wrong for Labour, we've done sort of post-match analysis, post-mortems of what it was, and one of the criticisms that is constantly made of Corbyn and the Corbyn movement, I think from outside of the Labour camp, is that there was a tribalist mentality, that stuff was going wrong, and that because of the, some would say cult, surrounding the leader, there was no way for that messaging to get across that something was wrong, and therefore the fact that it didn't resonate with the rest of the country wasn't taken into account. You must have heard that criticism. Do you have a response to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've got to separate out some of the different strands. One is the interesting thing is that Corbyn as an individual is an instinctive consensus maker, hates conflict, can't abide it. Then you've got a parliamentary Labour Party where some aspects of it are trying to take his head off. And you've got also around him, people who've come up through the trade union movement. And when it comes to thinking about politics as zero-sum conflicts where you've got to pulverize your opponent into submission, as that makes up a lot of his core team of advisors. So you've got a strange hodgepodge of tendencies which are then presenting itself as the Labour Party and the Labour movement in a general election. And I think merely saying there was a failure to take on board different kinds of ideas fails to take into account that there were all these different things going on. I think when it comes to political strategy and the clear errors in political strategy, which I think, hindsight's a beautiful thing, and you can see the seeds of them much sooner than 2019. One huge one is that you've got a left-wing movement, which I thoroughly consider myself a part of, which sees history as a sort of mechanistic and predetermined force. So you go, well, let's look at the distribution of wealth in this country. It means that social forces are going to move in this direction. And ultimately, if like evangelists, we go out and we sort of reveal the divine truth of this motion of history, the electorate that we are working with is the sort of electorate that we want. So you don't really have to do that much persuading when you have that particular view of history. And then things start falling apart when you actually have to get out there and contest an election. And I think that that failure to see that there was a huge difference in terms of the public mood between 2017 and 2019, the failure to think about new persuasive models beyond saying, well, it's predetermined because it's the organisation of wealth in this country, it's going to be something which haunts the left for many years to come. It certainly haunts me. Thinking about that as a crisis of tribalism or a crisis of civility, I don't think actually gets to the heart of the matter there.
But people do say of Labour, sort of, the right looks for converts, the left looks for traitors.
I mean, so when it comes to the sort of hard-edgedness of the left, again, what it is that made up the movement of Corbynism was lots and lots of different tendencies, right? You had people who would align themselves very much with a sort of Lexit point of view, that dyed-in-the-wool Bennites. You've got people who were, you know, sort of social progressives, very civic-minded and really, really hated austerity. And when it comes to that sort of project of strict ideological alignment, probably didn't fully buy into that. So again, it's about where are you identifying this tendency of the left? It's something which is hugely amplified on social media. Is it necessarily a fair reflection of, you know, 500,000 Labour members? I would say no. I would say don't judge everyone by my bad habits.
Nikos, social media, Twitter, toxicity online, particularly with the Brexit debate, particularly watching the Brexit debate as a non-Brit, do we have a problem with online discourse? And is that more of a problem than Ash is possibly acknowledging?
Yeah, but I don't think it's only online. So my weirdest Brexit story is I was working in a university and there was this technician who was working there for 3 decades. And he was something like some months away from retirement. So he was a guy who was established, everyone loved him. So he spotted me as the only Brexiteer in the building, and it was a big building. So he would drag me in his room and he would close the door and say, do you think Brexit has a chance? So he thought that the stakes for him being ostracized were so high that he had to like whisper. Now, what does social media do to that? So normally, I don't know what are the political affiliations, let's say, of the people I meet at the gym or at the corridor. Now with social media, this guy is not the guy who helps me bench press, is the guy who yesterday wrote this thing about Brexit. So now when I see him at the gym, I'm already kind of angry. So I think the social media do indeed kind of amplify this, they don't cause it, but I think they amplify it. Specifically if you have this kind of negative attitude. So if it was like, you know, now that I met you, I have all this on the back of my head. It's like, oh, I already like don't like you. So I think this is something which is not helpful. So it's difficult to resist this, but I think it's doable.
But in terms of that sort of amplified social media nastiness, I mean, I think, sure, and it's definitely something, you know, if you read Mark Fisher's work, Exiting the Vampire Castle, which was a work that he published, you know, a couple of years before he took his own life, is that he was talking about, you know, a culture on the left which was always looking for reasons to exclude people from public life. And that's something which I think has been a result of, you know, identity politics is something which is used dismissively, but I think it's actually identity absent from politics, and it's thinking about these things which are irreducible and, you know, can only be experienced through conflict and hostility and pain, rather than something which can be reconciled through some kind of shared political project or experience. And it's something which I think Mark Fisher was really prescient about. But in terms of thinking about, well, how do you then deal with the fact that politics is also about the contestation of public space? It's also about the sort of seeking to share, spread and embed particular sets of social values. This conflict is obviously a part of that as well. And so I think it's about, you know, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. I think one of the things that the left needs to learn how to do is, again, find those shared cultural and social techniques which bring people in, as well as putting up the walls.
Please, you mentioned identity politics there. I learned a new term in the green room. Apparently, I'm an alt-centrist. Didn't know that was a thing.
According to Aaron Bastani, yeah.
Yeah, I'm an alt-centrist, great. But you've got to admit, both of you, that if you just take the social media discourse, stuff starts to get very, very weird. We've got a potential coronavirus epidemic in this country. Much as I dislike his politics, I don't think we can blame that on Boris Johnson. But we have people on the left who seem to. Some people disagree with me. We can talk that out in the comment section afterwards. But you've got some people on social media who seem to be willing the crisis here to get as bad as it possibly can, so they can point to the fact that we had a useless Prime Minister. Similarly, we've got a Home Secretary who has some quite worrying allegations that are made about her from a HR perspective, and you've got people on the right saying, firstly, well, you know, we shouldn't criticise her at all because it's just the elitist civil servant and service, and secondly, that the right is saying we can't criticise her because she's an Asian woman and therefore it doesn't matter that she may have bullied staff, it's sort of totally irrelevant. You've got people who are switching sides based on whether they believe in identity politics or not, depending on as it suits them. Are you both really saying that isn't a problem?
But I just don't think that's necessarily anything new. And again, going back to the sort of 90s and 2000s, one of the things which helped John Major's government get booted out was accusations of sleaze, corruption and hypocrisy. What happens? Tony Blair comes in, there are scandals to do with sleaze, corruption and hypocrisy. And then suddenly, if you're a Labour supporter, especially one who has, you know, survived 18 years of the Thatcherite wilderness, you're like, well, I will find myself defending this because actually the political survival of this project means so much to me. I think, again, the way in which social media records all of our thoughts and contradictory feelings about things in real time, it then means that you are more able to be a sort of, you know, a forensic detective of other people's hypocrisy, because you can go back to the tweet and pull it up and go, aha, but 2 weeks ago you said this thing. Whereas I think this tendency isn't anything particularly new. I think it's something which is amplified, embedded, and has led to strange new sort of micro events of, you know, not just the event itself, but people's responses to that event being considered, you know, part of political terrain. But hypocrisy, contradictory points of view, that's as old as the hills.
Is she right? Is everything actually fine?
Actually, what you said just occurred. I had a thought that occurred to me. It might not go anywhere, but so basically you said...
It's a safe space, Nikos.
It's a safe space, okay. So you said something interesting. You said someone wants Johnson to fail so much that that person would rather the bad things happening. I think there's an element of nihilism, and the root of that nihilism is this abandonment of ideas. Because no matter what, if you're a leftist or a conservative, whatever, when you're inspired by ideals, you have something positive. You are, I want to bring, I don't know, fully automated luxury cars, whatever. However, when you give this up, so this is something that you know, it's a value. You have something. When you give this up, and it's like me being a leftist, my number one characteristic is that I hate the other side so much. Then even this element of a positive value goes out of the window. So then it becomes this kind of despair, like almost nihilistic thing. We're talking about the whole incel phenomenon back in the green room, and I think you see in many parts of the political spectrum today this idea that I don't want to achieve something because I've given up on the idea that things can change. This is basically end of history in steroids. I don't think that I can change something. Best thing is, you know, we can, this very small change, and since things cannot change, two things are the alternatives. The one is I retreat to myself, but not myself as this capable individual who's gonna change the world and write history. I retreat to myself and I do a bit of, no offense to people who do that, yoga, new age spirituality, nothing wrong with that. But the problem sometimes is that I've given up on changing the world, so best case scenario is I change myself. Or even worse, I can't change the world, so the hell with the world. I can't change the world, so I give up completely any hope. So I want what was the Joker line on the previous Joker? Some people just want to see the world burn. Actually, I think this is the logical outcome of giving up on the idea that human beings can be the authors of history, that human beings can change the world. Because again, if we have this idea that reason doesn't help us in understanding the world, and I don't want to use the term postmodernism kind of liberally, but you get what I mean. If the world is not up for you to understand and to change, then you give up on the world. And it doesn't take much then to say, I hate the world. So I think this is part of this toxicity, which I agree with you, it's definitely there, and it's definitely a problem. And actually, it gets creepy and creepier, like the stories you were telling with the green room, that's like creepy stuff. Yeah.
I think all that talk of the end of the world, I could probably do with a drink pretty soon, but before we go to an audience break and come back and get all of your thoughts, end of the world, nihilism, have you got anything positive or uplifting to counter that with? Or do you also agree that basically we're arguing on Twitter because, yeah, what else can we do?
I mean, I did think this the other day as maybe I scrolled past maybe the 10th photoshopped image of me with a beard. I was like, you know, here I am howling into the void at people who really just want me to, you know, back down and admit that I've got facial hair while the planet is boiling to death. What am I doing? And then I was like, I wouldn't be doing anything else with my time. I mean, and I think that like Richard Seymour writes about this really interestingly about the Twittering machine in terms of how it's designed to suck in and up.
It's outrage culture. The more you're angry, the more you stay on it, the more.
But it's also designed. The Twitter only cares about engagement. It doesn't care whether that engagement is a positive experience or a negative experience, and it's built in order to be addictive. So it sucks you in. And like any other addiction, you're like, well, this is making me miserable. I'm not going to give it up though, because why would I? Because you know there's enough little flickers of enjoyment, and my little dopamine receptors are lit up when someone hits like, and I'm like, well, there we go. And the other thing is because I think we're still grappling with to what extent is social media an accurate reflection of our social world. There was one tendency which said it isn't a reflection of our social world at all. And then that turned out to be complete bollocks. And now there's a sort of, countervailing tendency which goes, it's the entirety of our social world, which I think might also be bollocks. I think maybe thinking about social media as a tool rather than a terrain might be the better way to do this. You start thinking about what it can do for the cause that you dearly believe in and how you should use it strategically. I'm not saying that I do. And that's a more productive way to think about it rather than just, I'm hitting retweet while the world burns.
I mostly tweet cat pictures. All right, I think we're going to take a break and go fuel ourselves up on alcohol before getting with you on things.
Ladies and gentlemen, could we give it up for our panel, please? Yes, we're going to take a 10 to 15-minute break. I'd like to definitely be restarting the second section by 9. If you'd like to help yourself to food and more drink in the kitchen. And we'll be back by 9 o'clock, please, for the second half. Thank you.